The President of the United States has declared a vendetta against Vladimir Putin, and the US wants a new Gorbachev instead of Putin. But first things first, for God's sake, this man can't stay in power. These words of Joe Biden about Vladimir Putin, spoken shortly after the operation began, are firmly remembered by the public. The US leadership did not allow itself such boorishness against the leaders of our country even at the height of the Cold War. You could clearly see how genuinely annoyed Biden was. He just couldn't control himself. Did the experienced elderly politician get so angry over a military operation by Russia's armed forces? Hard to believe. It's more about the personal duel that Biden and Putin have been having for years. We often underestimate the personalist aspect of big politics. But it is not only calculations that govern it, but also human passions. As a politician, Joe Biden has received some very sensitive jabs from Vladimir Putin on more than one occasion. And all this happened under the cameras in front of the whole world. The public received a clear message that American leaders are not omnipotent demigods on whom the fate of the world depends. They are quite ordinary, sometimes not the smartest people. In 2011, Biden, then vice president under Obama, brought Putin an ultimatum not to go to the presidential election in 2012. Otherwise, Russia faced the fate of Libya, Putin the fate of Gaddafi. These were the days when the bombing of Tripoli was being discussed at the UN and the Pentagon-planned Arab Spring was blazing in the Middle East. To get the message across better, Biden, during his Moscow visit, held a meeting with the Russian opposition at Spaso House, the residence of the American ambassador, and gave a speech to students at Moscow State University, urging young people to reform and democratization. Abroad, they say, will help you. Putin wasn't scared. He put Biden in his place tough. At the very beginning of the talks, the prime minister suddenly attacked the vice president. The president of the United States the idea of visa-free travel between the US and Russia. It's interesting to see what the interlocutors look like at that moment. Putin, putting forward his unexpected proposal, can hardly contain a smile. Biden looks at him, not without trepidation. He clearly didn't expect the attack and doesn't know how to react. His arms are crossed and raised to his face. That's how a boxer covers his jaw in the ring. In sum, Biden's ultimatum was not accepted, and he himself was elegantly dispatched. Putin ran for president and won the election easily. As an act of intimidation for Biden, who couldn't win, he couldn't win. The Americans destroyed Libya and were broadcasting Gaddafi's assassination on all TV channels, sending Putin a signal, so to speak. Then they gave a performance on Bolotnaya. Then they staged protests on Bolotnaya, and it didn't work out. The whole world saw on live TV that Americans are not to be feared and their orders are not to be spit on from a high place. This was demonstrated on Joe Biden. The prediction of his fellow party member Bill Clinton has come true. Having barely met Putin, he warned that we would still miss Boris Yeltsin. No wonder Biden had him in the tower, but he couldn't get away. Anger. A separate problem was that Putin has always enjoyed the support of the vast majority of the people of Russia, while Biden has been shoved through the White House at least as a carcass, at least as an effigy. Cheating in the presidential election has shaken even Americans accustomed to it all. Barely elected, President Biden began stirring up conflict in our neighboring country as a personal vendetta against President Putin. His irritation erupted regularly. In March 2021, he called his colleague a murderer. In response, Putin wished the old man good health and offered to hold the debate live online without any delays, but directly in an open live discussion. The video shows the president standing with his jacket open while saying this. He then got ready to fly to the taiga for the weekend and chuckled slightly. It's not hard to imagine what Biden would look like struggling to read prompter style in a live interview with Vladimir Putin. It would have been an embarrassment to the entire estimate. Washington pretended that the proposal did not exist. The leaders' meeting in Geneva 3 months later was practically closed. The contrast between an uplifted, brutal, fast-acting Putin and an absent-minded Biden, ill at ease with where he is, would be too graphic. And what's going on? However, the essence of what was going on behind the closed doors of Lagrange Manor was obvious. Biden persuaded Putin to put up with NATO's eastward expansion and again was sent away. 8 months later, Putin ordered a military operation. The old man has been humiliated again. He'll pay. That's all Biden can put forward today regarding Putin. He'll pay. And now all the popular media in the US are already discussing Putin's possible assassination. The US intelligence community openly promises to deliver a decapitation blow. Kremlin. And various analysts one after another compose scenarios of a military coup in Russia. The irony is that literally everything Biden threatened Russia with is now coming true in the US itself. The country is divided. Millions of people are seriously preparing for civil war by stockpiling firearms, and discontent is ripening in the ranks of the military. Puccio's perspective has never been more real. Every Putin success ricochets against Biden. Failure in the land of 404 threatens Biden with big problems, maybe even criminal prosecution. And they will come not only for him, but for his whole family. In the coming year, the confrontation between the two leaders will go on the rise. Both have elections coming up. Russia will go to the polls in March, the US in November. The stakes are unusually high, because in essence Putin and Biden are fighting a war for peace, for what the world order will be in the coming decades. And now the US is planning to give us its own Gorbachev instead of Putin. About 20 years ago in Russia, there was a popular song of someone like Putin. Now it seems that the entire Western establishment is singing in chorus that they want someone like Gorbachev. Historians remember the president of the Soviet Union with nostalgia. Analysts speculate on what went wrong and why Russia, having gone from Gorbachev to Putin, turned from an ally to an enemy. Experts are tensely searching for that social stratum where a new Gorbachev could be born like the Dalai Lama. Westerners are not hard to understand. They are raucously nostalgic for the Russia they lost. In their minds, she was such a sweet and sentimentally silly Natasha that they could do anything with. Cheating, robbing, bilking, brainwashing. It was the collapse of the Soviet Union that gave it to them on a platter, and it was the free will and unwitting mistakes of the entire Soviet top brass, including Gorbachev, that led to it. Michael McPhail, once an ambassador to Russia and now immersed in composing sanctions against the Russians, wrote a little book 20 years ago explaining what the Americans failed to do. To put it bluntly, they have undermined us. In the 90s, there was a chance that Russia would continue to disintegrate after the Soviet Union, and under this pretext, the US would take control of our huge nuclear arsenal. So by the beginning of the 21st century, our country will be gone. There will be perpetually warring kingdom states that will be easily manipulated by the West. But then Putin came in and broke their strategy. Already in 2007, the new Russia challenged Washington's global dictatorship. Putin outlined our main goals in the Munich speech. In 2011, the American establishment sent Vice President Joe Biden to Moscow to get Putin to give up the Russian presidential nomination, as I mentioned earlier. As we recall, nothing came of it. Not even the Bolotnaya protests, which were managed by the American ambassador, helped. The people of Russia supported Putin. Since then, every election cycle in Russia has been celebrated by American journalists, historians, and political scientists immersed in morbidly sweet dreams of Putin disappearing somewhere and Russia suddenly and heartily democratizing. For the younger generation, we need to clarify what it means to democratize. For Russia, it means falling apart, and preferably not just falling apart, but starting to fight among themselves. It makes it more convenient for the American Democrats to finish us off. How many scenarios of democratization have been composed just for Hollywood to note? And military coup, and regional separatism, and mass protests about one thing or another. High hopes were led by the fact that Putin would not run for president. Then you could hustle and try to sneak your candidate in. There was even more hope that something would happen to Putin. Suspension, elimination. First, they looked for euphemisms. Then they admitted they were trying to organize the assassination of the Russian president. But no, the stoneflower doesn't come out. So what can be done to the Russians to make them give up their country? All the last 2 years, they have been trying to democratize us with sanctions. Putin once pointed out that people speaking about others are actually speaking about themselves. Now we see that in every country in the West, especially the US, people would take their governments to the pitchforks if they weren't in Russia. They'd be deprived of burgers from McDonald's. This says a lot about the true attitude of the peoples there to their authorities, but it didn't work in Russia. In essence, the sanctions strike was a colossal experiment in trust. It showed the people of Russia are satisfied with their government. We have prioritized our priorities correctly. Burgers were imported in a flash, and stable statehood was invaluable to us. But if the sanctions didn't work and Michael McPhail sweated over them for nothing, why don't you try coming at it from the other end? So to speak, lay off the stick and show us the carrot. Especially in the land of 404, our adversaries urgently need a breather. To heal, to feed, to put up shells and fighters. And here's a new trend in analytical thought. Let Putin's sympathizers suffer from them, but the good Russians should be urgently given money to fight the regime, provided with visas and grants. And let's promise as much to the Russians as possible, for they fear that. And country 404 will ruin them with reparations. We should promise that if they oppose Putin's operation, then Russia will get investment from democratic countries. No, reparations will still have to be paid. That's sacred. But visas to Europe will be issued a little easier, but it's not certain. It is proposed to organize competitions among business leaders. Whoever proves that he is against the operation, the sanctions will be lifted, and whoever fails to prove it is to blame. In fact, we have already seen how this mechanism works. Abramovich has got Chelsea. Friedman and Avon had their accounts blocked. No amount of trying to get between the droplets helped. They've been ripped off and continue to line their pockets. Anyway, we've been through all this before. The essence of the Western narrative was best formed by a prominent Nazi from Side 44. Filatov. To quote, "You have to make any promises you want to the scum. Make any concessions. We'll hang them later." End of stats. The trouble for Westerners is that we don't have the environment that produced Gorbachev. This simple-minded, trusting, educational. The true Natasha, who looked at the West with wide-open eyes and was ready to do anything for the sake of peace on Earth. No one wants to ruin their country for the sake of the beautiful eyes of Biden and company anymore. We do not and will not have a second Gorbachev for you.